There it is.
Mhm.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to the OWEB Grant Committee meeting. For the record, my name is Dan Brown, ex officio board member from EPA. I co-chair the grant committee with board member Barbara Boyer. And I'm going to remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded and it's also being streamed on YouTube, and all of the meeting materials are available on the OWEB website. I will call on folks to quickly introduce themselves, ending with Barbara, who will then go through the agenda for today. So I'm just going to go through the list here and including OWEB staff, starting with Ivy.
Good morning. My name is Ivy Clark Henry. I am an admin specialist with the Watershed Enhancement Board.
Eric.
Good morning, everybody. Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager at OWEB, and I'll turn it over to my partner in crime, Eric Hartstein, to introduce himself.
Thanks. Good morning, Eric Hartstein, Board Legislative Policy Coordinator, and I'll go to Taylor.
Hi, Taylor Larson here. I'm the coordinator for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, and I'll pass it to Jillian.
Good morning, everyone. Jillian McCarthy, Partnerships Coordinator, and I work in the FIP program. And I'll pass it to Denise.
Good morning, it's Denise Hoffert, the other OWEB Partnerships Coordinator, and I will pass it to Audrey.
Good morning, I'm Audrey Hatch, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator, and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Ken.
Morning, everybody. Ken Fetcho, OWEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator and Tribal Liaison. I'll turn it back to Co-Chair Brown. Thank you.
All right. I think we missed Lisa.
Good morning, Lisa Sharple Hansen, Executive Director at the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Great. Was that all OWEB staff?
You got everybody.
All right. Phew, it's a lot. Okay. And now the board members. Mark, why don't you go?
Okay, thank you. Mark Labhart, representing the ODF and W Commission, and I'm a voting member.
And Lindsay.
Good morning, everybody. Lindsay McClary, Public at Large voting member. I live in West Salem and I work for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde.
I thought I saw Eliza Jane, but I don't see her anymore.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, Barbara.
That's all right. Liza Jane McAllister, co-chair of the OWEB board representing the public at large. And I had to use a rope to get from my house to the barn this morning. It's a blizzard here. I'm teasing about the rope, but it's wild in Wallowa County right now. So it's great to be with you all.
Fun. How about you, Chris?
Good morning, everybody. Jealous about the snow, Liza Jane. Wish we had some of that here in Portland. Board member, committee member, representing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you.
All right. I think that's everybody. So how about you, Barbara?
Good morning, Barbara Boyer, co-chair of the grant committee and co-chair of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And I represent the state Board of Agriculture on the board. So today we are going to go through the agenda, but I think I first wanted to jump to the public comment. We did receive lots of written comment. I kind of lost count of how many we received. And we will be addressing those in the course of our agenda today. Has anybody signed up for verbal comment, Ivy?
Good morning. Yes, we have 3 folks signed up for public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right. And so I'm going to review the agenda real quickly with everybody. I think we got copies of it, but we're going to review the Oregon Ag Heritage Commission members, applications we received. And then we're going to talk about want to find conservation outcome spending plan item. We are going to talk about updates to administrative rule to Division 5 and focused investment partnerships. We're going to dig deep into that program today. And then we're going to have public comment. So that is our agenda, and it is posted online. If anybody didn't capture all that, that's out in YouTube land. So, oops. Did I hear somebody? Okay. All right, so we are going to go down to agenda item number 2, and that is Oregon Ag Heritage Commission Natural Resource Value Interest Member Recommendation. So today we are making a recommendation to the full board of the 4 applications that we received. And who's taking the lead on this, Eric? I know you sent me that.
Taylor will take the lead on that
Okay,
one.
thank you. I know you sent that this morning, but I didn't commit it to memory.
It's okay.
Thanks.
All right, Taylor, you want to warm us up on this, please?
Yeah, I threw together a couple of slides just to orient us. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. All right, can everybody see that? Those beautiful flowers there?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, so yeah, as Barbara mentioned, what we're here to do today is to make a recommendation to the full OWEB board on someone to serve on the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission. I'm representing natural resource interests, and the commission oversees what's called the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, but I just wanted to kind of remind us all of the purpose and how it talks to OWEB. It's a program of OWEB, and it has kind of 3 main purposes. So it's to increase the economic viability of Oregon's agricultural operations and the economic sector. So we're looking at how do we promote agricultural viability on the farm level, and then how do we sort of zoom out and look at the agricultural economy as a whole, and step in and help solve problems on that front and make it a healthy space for folks to be running viable businesses now and far into the future. And then we look at how do we reduce the conversion and fragmentation of working lands throughout the state. And then while we're doing this, how do we integrate the enhancement of fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, and other natural resources on these working lands that we're working on? And because we are OWEB, we do this through grant programs. So the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program has 4 main grant programs. We do what are called working land conservation covenants and easements. And these are very much what they sound like they are, where we fund the purchase of development rights on farms and ranches throughout the state in order to keep those farms and ranches intact, agriculture, so that they can be agriculturally viable and provide those natural resource benefits that we care about. We also fund what are called conservation management plans. These are 20 to 50-year plans, usually looking at integrating those natural resource interests with the agricultural viability piece. And then we're currently working on a methodology to go so that we can pay for the implementation of these plans, so that we can step in and fill some gaps where there are where there may not be existing conservation programs out there to do the work that needs to be done, or they aren't adequately funded. So that's a pretty exciting part of the work at the moment. In the future, we'll also be funding succession planning grants. These are we'll fund capacity for folks to kind of facilitate the transitions, those handoffs from one generation to the next, which is a big focus of the program. And then we'll also be making technical assistance grants at organizations who are doing this work, because it takes a lot of legwork to bring a conservation management plan or a working land conservation easement to fruition. So those are the grant programs that fall under the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. And I also just wanted to mention that the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program has its own fund associated with it, that it currently is receiving general funds, but it's set up such that it can receive funds from any source, so long as they're consistent with that purpose I mentioned at the top. So anyway, just all that to say, these are sort of the pieces of the program that the commission oversees to a certain degree. So the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission is appointed by the OWEB board, and they're sort of tasked with, they're like the brain trust of the program, really. So they draft the program rules, they consider all applications that we receive, and then they make the formal funding recommendation to the OWEB board. So it's a bit unique as far as an OWEB grant program goes, because the program itself has its own commission, who sort of serves as an advisory board, and then also makes those formal funding recommendations to the board. So we have kind of an extra step in our review process. And as you can see, there's 12 members on the commission. All of them are recommended by different bodies. So we have 5 members that are recommended by the Board of Agriculture, 4 representing agricultural interests, and then 1 representing a water quality interest. We have 2 that are recommended by the Fish and Wildlife Commission to represent the habitat on working lands throughout the state. We have 1 recommended by LCDC, 1 recommended by the OSU Extension Director. And then we have these 3 positions that are selected directly by OWEB. So you'll see we have the 1 that is supposed to be representing natural resource interests, and those are the 4 applications we'll be considering today. And we have 1 that is supposed to represent tribal interests. And then we have 1 OWEB board member that is a non-voting member of the commission, and we're lucky enough to have Barbara serving in that role currently. So I'll just throw this up here. This is in your board packet. So these are our current commissioners, and you'll see where we have vacancies. Let me just pull this up here. So you can see we do have Ken Bailey, who will be rotating off. His term is up, and his position, there's been a nomination put forward by the Board of Agriculture, and that's Laura Masterson. So that will be considered at the January OWEB board meeting for an appointment. And similarly down here, we have a vacancy in the Fish and Wildlife Commission appointed or nominated seat. And Ed Contreras has been nominated, and he'll be considered at the January board meeting. So our job is this other vacancy here. We had Mark Bennett step off of the commission recently, and so we need to fill this natural resource interest seat. And so our job here as the grants committee is to make a nomination to the OWEB board so that they can consider the nomination and make an appointment at the January board meeting when they appoint both Ed Contreras and Laura Masterson. And so here are the 4 applications we received. They're also in your board packet. So we have Chris Colson, Robin Vora, Russ Holflick, and Sarah Evan Peters. And so here's sort of the timeline we're looking at. So we had those applications, they were due October 31st. Now here we are, December 1st. The grants committee is going to consider those applications and then make a recommendation to the OWEB board on who they think they ought to appoint. At the January 24th, 25th board meeting, the full board will appoint all the new Ag Heritage Commission members. And then on March 16th, we have our next Ag Heritage Commission meeting, where the commission is actually going to be considering applications we've received for both the conservation easements as well as the conservation management plan grants, and then make that formal funding recommendation to the OWEB board, who will then hopefully fund those projects at their April board meeting. So that is kind of the overview. I'm happy to answer some context questions, Barbara, if you want to, if anybody has those, but really it's up to the committee here to consider the 4 applications we've received, have whatever debate we seem possible, and then try and get to a nomination to the full board. So I'll just end it right there.
Thank you, Taylor. Does anybody have questions for Taylor before we move forward? I have one quick recommendation, Taylor. The graph where you had everybody's name that's on the commission right now.
Yeah.
For future, with that document, could you put their expiration when their terms are up on that sheet, just so we can start thinking forward when we see that there's a date coming up, that we can just kind of have that on our radar.
Yeah, I almost consider that adding that in at the last second, actually, but
Okay,
that's a good call, Barbara.
thank you. So we can all keep thinking about who we can recommend, ask to apply. So
Yeah, because we're getting to the point in the program where everybody's terms are kind of starting to expire. So we are going to be doing this on a semi-regular basis going forward.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
All right, are there any other questions for Taylor? All right, not seeing any. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I had a quick one, Barbara. So the four applicants we're discussing today, is there a screening process at the staff level regarding those applications and their qualifications before we see them as grant committee members?
So they all submitted references. And so we did do a reference check. Everybody's references that we were able to get a hold of gave positive recommendations. So there were no red flags raised on any of these applicants. So we consider them all qualified for the position and feel comfortable, bringing them to the committee here. But it is the job of the OWEB board to appoint those commission seats. So there's not, at least in statute, much of a role for staff in that regard, except for soliciting applications and then trying to organize those and bring those to the board.
All right, thanks, Taylor.
Yeah.
Were there any that didn't get put forward?
Of applications we received?
Yes.
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I have a question. It's kind of glaring, so I'm sure everybody's curious on this one, on Chris with his address being in Boise. Can you address that, please?
Eric, you articulated this so well last time we talked. I can
Sure.
take a stab at it, but you're the rules guy, so.
No, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Thanks for the question. For the record, Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager at OWEB. We looked into that because we had the same question when we saw the application come in. While Chris has been incredibly active, particularly in the Harney Basin, in terms of habitat restoration there, his residence is in Idaho. And so when we looked at the statute, the language in the statute is interesting, because for the 5 positions that are recommended by the Board of Agriculture, the statute talks about being from within this state. It does not have that language for the other positions. And so we interpreted that as not being restrictive. And so we determined that Chris was an eligible applicant for the position.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so I'm going to ask committee members, is there a recommendation that just floats right to the top that somebody would want to make a nomination? Do you want to go through each of these individually, or does somebody just come right to the top where you just want to bring that nomination forward? Go ahead, Lindsay.
Thanks, and good morning again, everybody. For the record, Lindsay McCleary. I kind of have a tie, which is probably not helpful, but for me, the top 2 candidates are Sarah Evans Peters and Russ Holflick, with both of their connections, experience, and partnerships that were documented in the packet of information. So just want to say first, thanks so much, Taylor, for putting together a great presentation, and OWEB staff for putting together the packet. It was really easy to read and go through. And then also thank you so much to the 4 applicants and their references and letters of support. I know it took work to do that, and appreciate folks' willingness to fill this role and spend time on such important work. So thank you so much to all of the applicants. But for me, those are the top two. I do think regionally, it would be important to have some representation in Eastern Oregon. When we look at who's on the board and on the commission right now, there is a lot of Willamette Valley and coastal representation. So just wanted to throw that out there, but you know, interested in having a discussion, but those are my top two.
Thank you, Lindsay. Anybody else want to weigh in? Liza Jane?
Thank you, Barbara. I have a tie as well with Russ. I agree with you, Lindsay. And actually, wow, to having 4 such incredible choices. So we can't go wrong. But I worked for the Nature Conservancy on the Zoo Mall, and when Russ was a director, and I also serve as a advisory member of the Rancher Committee for 1,000 Friends. But I feel, not knowing Sarah and working with Russ, that his passion and his experience and work has really aligned with what OHAP is about. So I lean that direction. But again, we can't go wrong here. So.
Thank you, Liza Jane. Mark?
Yep, same comment. It's always tough when you have 4 qualified applicants and trying to narrow it down. Now, it's not that we're saying they're all qualified. We could probably choose any one of those to make a good representation to the OWEB board for final decision making. But I would agree with my colleagues there. Mark Bennett was a really good advocate for agriculture. I'm sorry to lose him, but I think we've got a couple candidates that are kind of up there toward the top with me, and I would agree with both.
Thank you. Chris?
Just echoing what we've been hearing so far in terms of my review of the applications, Russ and Sarah floated to the top for me. I haven't worked with Sarah. I don't know her personally. I did work under Russ Hoflick for a number of years when I was with TNC, and can really speak to his qualifications and skill set and decades of experience here in the state. So I guess I would maybe lean a little bit toward Russ, just given my personal knowledge of him, but Sarah seemed very qualified as well.
Thank you. Dan, do you want to weigh in?
I would say that I agree with the fact that there's 4 great candidates, and so it's good to know that they're out there as more terms come up for renewal. We have some candidates to sort of turn to, and what I'm hearing is that there seems to be a pretty solid endorsement of Russ for this particular nomination, if I'm hearing everybody correctly. And so I guess I'd suggest maybe that's who we would recommend to the board. I don't know if I need to make any kind of formal motion in that regard. Eric, do you know, or Taylor?
Yes, we would prefer that whatever your recommendation is, it be done with a motion, a second, and
Okay.
a vote.
All right. Well, go ahead, Mark.
Before we do that, Barbara, did you weigh in, or did I?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay. Yeah, could you weigh in, Barbara, and get your
Thank
opinion?
you.
Thanks, Mark.
So, Lindsay brought up my point is they're all great applicants. I'm really glad they're out there because the next phase of this program is a pretty heavy lift. So I look at that lens with these applicants also. But the geography is pretty important to me in representation. I mean, I've worked with Russ. He's phenomenal. I mean, I think he is a good pick. But I do think in the future, we really need to think geography. So, I mean, that's why Chris kind of floated to the top for me, was just geography. It wasn't the qualifications were better, or less. But I mean, Russ is a good pick, so I would support that motion. So Dan, were you gonna make it?
I was, and you know, if geography is important, we can sort of weigh in on geography as well. It's we have Sarah from Independence, Oregon. Chris, he's done a lot of ag specific work in Eastern Oregon.
All right, I see a couple of hands up. So Mark, what do you want to weigh in on?
Yeah, on geography. I know it's nice to see us, but could we go back to the chart with all the candidates, Taylor? And could you just really briefly cover where we are geography? Because I also feel that we need to have broad representation, because agriculture is just as important in Eastern Oregon as it is the rest of the state and the discussion. So it's the one where you listed all of them, the one chart there.
Yeah, okay, let me pull that up, put you over here. And this one. And you wanted the one where
you've listed them all, Department of Ag, the ODF.
Oh, okay, the current
membership.
Current list. How are we spread out there?
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Could you blow that up a little bit? Or maybe it's me here. I guess
maybe not.
There we go. I got it now.
Okay, sorry. I don't know how to do that.
Just real quickly, are we spread out across the state with what we've got already, not including the vacancies? That's a question that I think I agree with Barbara, that need to at least see how we're currently.
Yeah, and I can just say, Laura is another Willamette Valley so that nomination is from the Valley, and then Ed Contreras is down in the Klamath Falls area. So as far as our two other nominations, we get a little bit.
Okay, and we've got one from Wallowa and the Dalles.
Tillamook,
yeah. So we've really got one person from Eastern Oregon, it looks like. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then we lost Mark, who was also.
Yeah, and yeah, that's who we're. Yeah. Well, I'll go back to my original comment and then I'll be quiet. They're all qualified. They all would do a great job, but I do lean toward broad representation across the state if we have 4 qualified candidates. So
thank you. Liza Jane.
Thank you. I agree. Being a resident at the end of the road in Eastern Oregon, but I think the reason I brought up Russ's working with him on the Zoom wall is I believe that if he could live out here, he would. And I feel like what Chris said, his involvement in Oregon is statewide, and so I really support the geography concern, and maybe we can work in the future to, when we Taylor look at soliciting applicants, we could make a big effort out here. And again, I don't know Sarah, her application was incredible. Her work is amazing that she's accomplished, and she's well connected. So again, we can't go wrong, but I support that concern, and with the geography, but I feel like Russ has been involved in our whole entire state. So, so it makes me feel better about that choice.
Thank you, Liza Jane. Lindsay.
Thanks. I agree with Barbara. It's, you know, and it sounds like we're all kind of saying the same thing. Excuse me, geography is important, but I really liked what Barbara said, looking forward. And like Taylor pointed out, we're going to have more regular conversation about this because some appointments are expiring. So I think I'm going to go ahead and take a jump and make a motion to nominate Russ Holflick for the position.
Thank you, Lindsay. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, it's been moved by Lindsay, seconded by Liza Jane. Is there further discussion?
Well, just I want to make sure I understand. I don't know Russ like the rest of you do. So he does have some pretty broad background representing all of the state. Is that correct? I hear people. Okay, I see Liza Jane nodding.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
okay, thank you. That helps.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All right, motion passes unanimously
Aye.
for us to bring forward Russ's name for the full board to pass him forward. So thank you, everybody, for that great discussion and great applicants. Will these stay on file, or what's your next steps, Taylor, with these other 3 applicants?
So we'll follow up with them, kind of let them know how this conversation went. When you apply, you do apply for a specific seat. So if they were to re-up their application, a lot of the questions would be the same, but they would need to submit a new application with, you know, a lot of copy and pasting going on, because like you mentioned, lots of qualified folks. So I'll follow up with them.
Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on down the agenda. Dan, you want to take the next item?
Sure thing. We have quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes spending plan items. And I think, oh, I lost my email, which said, let's see, this is Ken's, right?
Yeah, Ken and Audrey
Yes.
will be
Okay.
tag teaming today. Thank you. Audrey, you gonna pull up those slides, please? So, yeah, good morning, board members. For the record, Ken Fetcho. I'm OEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. Today, Audrey and I will be tag teaming this agenda item. To assist with this presentation, we have prepared a 2-page handout that Eric Williams has sent you via email, and just wanted to pause to make sure you all have received it. And if not, we can provide a link to the document in the chat. See Chris nodding.
I got it. I got it.
Cool. Good, yeah, thank you. So in preparation for 2 funding requests that we will be bringing to the board at the January meeting, and 1 request that we have queued up for the April 23 board meeting, well, we thought it would be good to provide some background on the quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes line item in the spending plan, and then provide some specific information about each of the funding requests that we are working on. Just a quick note that for the funding request that will come to the board at the April 23 meeting, we'll plan to provide more detail during the March Grants Committee meeting. So the quantifying conservation outputs and outcomes line item in the spending plan was previously titled Programmatic Effectiveness Monitoring line item. And it was changed a few biennia ago to kind of better reflect what we really do with this funding. But the purpose intent has always stayed the same. So this spending plan line item helps to fund a broad range of activities and includes OEB-led initiatives to monitor and report progress on restoration actions at a larger geographic scale and over a longer period of time. So this program has supported targeted investments in the past, such as the Telling the Restoration Story grants that you will hear more about from Audrey in a little bit. And a few other priorities that we currently are working on is Tidegate restoration effectiveness monitoring and stage 0 restoration effectiveness monitoring. Stage 0 is a term that is used to define a stream channel condition that represents a multi-braided channel that is connected to the floodplain at all flow stages. It's getting a lot of attention right now, and a lot of folks are working on restoring to a stage 0 condition. And so we've prioritized that effectiveness monitoring over the last 4 years as well. These investments in this line item are brought forth by OWEB staff that are aligned with OWEB board priorities that in the past we have identified and discussed with the monitoring committee. And now that we have moved to a new board committee structure and there is no longer a monitoring committee, we are working with the grants committee to open this dialogue and to provide some background on this spending plan line item before we dig into the 2 funding requests that we plan to bring to the board in January. So before I pass this on to Audrey to talk about the telling the restoration story, I'd like to pause to see if you guys have any questions on the purpose or past projects that we have funded under this line item. I'm not seeing it. Maybe Eric, I can't necessarily see everybody, but I think I can. So maybe I'll pass it on to Audrey.
Thank you, Ken. For the record, Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator on staff with OWEB. Thanks for the opportunity to provide the information today on telling the restoration story. It is a targeted grant offering that helps the board and grantees really better communicate outcomes from restoration that's been funded by the agency. The grants support the compilation, analysis, and interpretation of existing data sets from watershed restoration projects, or more often multiple projects, and then use those results to produce informed outreach materials. Typically, the grantee produces a technical report or a data summary describing the long-term monitoring data sets that have been compiled or synthesized as a key part of the offering. The outreach products include fact sheets and oftentimes online story maps and videos that describe and quantify the results from restoration investments. The outreach products aim to reach a broad audience that includes the board and legislators. And telling the restoration story grantees also identify a specific audience so that those materials they develop can be used to communicate with landowners, land managers, restoration practitioners, folks who may be working to restore similar landscapes in Oregon. And since the board approved the funding for the Telling the Restoration Story offering in April of 2018, 9 projects have been completed. So far, Telling the Restoration Story has focused on open solicitation funded projects. Selected products from the offering are made available through an online map on OWEB's website. And then each granting organization provides links to all of the products they produced through their own organizational websites. 3 projects, in addition to those 9, 3 projects are currently funded and actively with work actively underway. These include projects describing pollinator habitat in the Zumwalt Prairie acquisition in Wallowa County, fish recovery improvements under the collaborative Lostine Flow Agreement, also in Wallowa County, and bull trout restoration in Sun Creek, located in the Klamath Basin. Each of these Telling the Restoration Story projects is likely to be completed with products available towards the end of calendar year 2023. So monitoring staff, that would be my colleague Ken Fatcho and myself, engage with OWEB's regional program representatives in the grants program really regularly. So a couple of times per biennium to sit down and kind of identify potential new projects where that sufficient long-term monitoring data might be available to tell a quantifiable story. And staff also discuss and coordinate to identify partners that could be available to serve as a grantee or a key advisor or contributor to the projects. And currently staff have 3 Telling the Restoration Story projects that could be poised to submit applications early next year. Just to give you a sense of the spread of these projects, they include one focusing on tidal restoration efforts in Nieleston on the southern Oregon coast, another that may focus on agricultural water quality improvements in the Little Butte and Bear Creeks in the Rogue watershed, and a potential project focusing on salmon restoration in the Sandy River Basin near Portland. And in addition to those, there are at least 3 other projects that are currently under active exploration through conversations among OWEB staff and potential collaborators and potential grantees. Telling the Restoration Story grantees are typically offered up to $30,000 per project. And so at this time, additional funding will, we anticipate the need for additional funding to be able to continue the offering. Therefore, in January, this staff will request up to $150,000 from the Quantifying Conservation Outputs and Outcomes line item in support of Telling the Restoration Story offering. And before kind of turning the baton back to my colleague Ken Feccio to give a brief overview of the other funding request, I'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any questions. If Dan or Eric or Ken could help monitor those questions, that would be great.
Okay, Liza Jane has a hand up.
Thank you. Audrey and Ken, this seems like such a great opportunity for OWEB to consider DEI here with our storytelling. I'm wondering if that's in part of this, how we can maybe offer these stories in Spanish. Do we have that lens on these projects when we look at those?
Yeah, thank you, Liza Jane. For the record, Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator. Not specifically with these projects, the emphasis has really been, I think a distinction I would make with, say, some of the broader outreach efforts, such as what's underway with the lottery. The distinction I would make with Telling the Restoration Story is the focus has been around making sure that that long-term data is available to quantify the story. And I would say I concur with your thought around thinking about the audience. It has not been a lens that's been applied specifically to this offering so far.
Okay, I want our story to be heard and by everyone, to get more people involved and have the opportunity. And whenever you use the word story, I don't think about data and numbers. And when things are data and number heavy, we lose a huge audience right off the bat. So it's really important in its monitoring and evaluation. But I hope that we can keep that in mind, that part of this, this is a great opportunity for outreach. So thank you.
All right, I see no other hands up, Audrey.
I'll have just one quick question for you is kind of along the lines of what Liza Jane's saying and getting the message out. Is there like a social media aspect to this? I mean, I know the story map is online. I've looked at it and it's fabulous, but people's attention is pulled in so many different directions. I'm not sure. Well, it'd be interesting to know if we get a lot of visitation on the website, but are there other kind of social media tools that can help get the attention focused to the website and that sort of thing?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Dan. For the record, Audrey Hatch, Conservation Outcomes Coordinator. I would say there is a whole suite of techniques that grantees have used through social media to amplify the message from all of the products that have been produced through this offering. One quick example would be the slide right now kind of showing the Wet Prairie Restoration Story Map was actually featured in spring of 2020 when the grantee needed to pivot to an online meeting, they were able to pull from the story map and use that for an online meeting. And there are several examples, I think, of the various products being amplified by grantees through social media. And I would add, I think OWEB has in recent months really increased the agency's use of social media. So that's a great point, great opportunity. There's also some thought going around the agency website and how to kind of make these the products of this offering a little bit more prominent, and that could certainly feed into a social media communication strategy.
Thank you.
Looks like Liza Jane, your hands up, or is it still? Okay. Cool. Let's see here. I think I might have you advance the slide. There you go. So keep us moving. Thanks everybody for your time and interest on this. Again, Ken Fetcho, OWEB's Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. So the next request we want to talk to you about today is just a really exciting project that Jesse Kirshner, Audrey, and I are collaborating with Dr. Rose Graves from the Nature Conservancy, or TNC. So TNC in Oregon is scoping a statewide carbon monitoring project that will begin next year to help quantify the climate benefits of what they're calling riparian reforestation, and which is basically the reestablishment of trees and woody vegetation in habitats beside streams and rivers that were once forested. So using a combination of field data collection and statistical modeling, this effort will lead to updated estimates of carbon accumulation over time in reforested riparian areas in Oregon. TNC is partnering with the University of Oregon, OWEB, DEQ, and others to estimate carbon storage over the near term, which they are defined as 0 to 35 years in restored riparian forests across a range of riparian vegetation types and across a variety of watersheds in Oregon. And so this work is intended to better understand how carbon stocks in restored riparian forests vary with time since planting occurred, how carbon storage and riparian site condition vary with species composition, management history, and across biophysical and climatic gradients. And then finally, to better understand how riparian carbon stocks and riparian site condition vary among restored riparian forests and between restored and untreated sites. Next slide, please. And so, we have started to prioritize staff efforts to explore monitoring opportunities to better elucidate the climate adaptation and mitigation benefits of restoration actions that OWEB funds due to all the attention that the board has been giving climate change with the passing of the climate resolution and recently completing the tribal and stakeholder engagement to better understand concerns and opportunities before we establish evaluative criteria across all grant programs. So with this in mind, staff has been meeting with Dr. Graves over the last 3 months to talk about her study and how we might be able to support her work to leverage their efforts. So at the January board meeting, we will be requesting that OWEB provide $100,000 to support this effort and expand the scope and scale to answer some important questions that OWEB and the state of Oregon are interested in. Let's see here, with OWEB support, TNC will be able to hire an additional technician to assist in data collection that will result in monitoring 6 to 10 additional sites. And increasing that sample size is just super important to be able to detect change associated with restoration actions. In addition, they will be able to measure additional parameters, including riparian shade and bank stability. This collaboration will help us better understand how site variables are influencing carbon storage and riparian conditions. We also expect to learn how site preparation and plant establishment efforts influence carbon storage and riparian condition. We're really interested in learning how certain riparian species may be surviving and thriving compared to others. so we can provide guidance to practitioners moving forward, and they can use that information in their planting plans. Currently, Dr. Graves coordinating with DEQ. We put her in touch with Aaron Costello over there to help identifying sampling sites and collaborating on the effective shade field monitoring methods and analyses approach. This information can be used by OWEB to determine how shade is improving with our investments in riparian planting efforts, and it'll help DEQ to better understand how TMDL targets are being met in areas that have completed TMDLs, or total maximum daily loads, in water temperature impaired streams. And then finally, one thing I wanted to mention is that Jesse and I will be presenting this in more detail with Dr. Rose Graves at the December 15th Water and Climate Committee that will be live streamed on YouTube. I believe some of you are also members on the Water and Climate Committee, and we'll be able to get into greater detail at that time. So with that, I thought I'd just pause to see if you guys have any questions or comments related to this carbon monitoring project and the request we plan to bring to the full board at the January meeting.
This is Mark, just a comment. Thank you. That's very interesting, and I appreciate the background on it.
Yeah, we're really excited. It's a great opportunity. We learned about Rose's efforts, and she was interested in partnering with OWEB too. And so we sort of had that mutual interest to work together. And over the last 3 months have really made a lot of progress and better understanding how we can better support them and sort of their goals and objectives.
Kevin, when's the Water and Climate Committee meeting? December what?
It's December 15th.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Ken, this may be sort of a way out there kind of a question, but I'll ask it anyway. So is this, is there any potential for this work to sort of, help with quantification of carbon from restoration projects that landowners could potentially turn into carbon credits at some future time to get some sort of payback for that land that they're giving over to restoration?
Yeah, I really don't know, David. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not familiar with the carbon market in Oregon. I know that some folks like Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs have sold carbon credits on the California market. And so I think there's potential for that, but of the details I'm just not familiar with, so I apologize.
No worries. I don't see any other hands up, Barbara.
Nope.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on there, Kevin?
One more, I think.
We have nothing else to talk about. Just realize that in March, when you guys meet again, we'll be talking about another request that we plan to bring at the April board meeting. And that's related to stage 0 effectiveness monitoring in White Creek. But really have no further detail on that at this time. We're working with the partners to prepare that information for the March committee meeting.
All right, thank you. Moving on down the agenda to number 4.
Let's see, Liza Jane, you had a question. I'm sorry, Barbara.
Okay.
I can address that. And so how about I read it if that's okay? So board member Liza Jane McAllister asked.
I got busted. I was trying to sneak that question out. Go ahead.
I think it's a good one. Is the amount of water used by various trees and plants in riparian areas included in monitoring information? And so we will be looking at that. There's a term called climate water deficit, which is really looking at the water stress that plants experience based on where they are in the position of the earth and where they are, elevation wise and aspect and east or west side and things of that nature. So that is going into Rose's stratification And they will be measuring soil moisture as well and soil infiltration rates. And so I don't know if we're going to get water consumption, you know, and maybe you might be looking at impacts to stream flow there, but we're starting to better understand really how plants can survive and or thrive and then therefore grow and provide benefits such as carbon storage associated with water stress, and then how that might benefit soil moisture.
Yeah,
helpful.
you know, thank you, Ken. This is Liza Jane. My thoughts are, you know, how we do one thing and it impacts everything. And so we want all these trees in these riparian areas, which need a lot of water. And my personal experience is cutting down, you know, 160 acres of juniper monoculture and seeing what happened in our groundwater on the valley floor. And I didn't have to irrigate this year. And I believe it's because we cut down all those water sucking junipers. So do we monitor that? Do we consider that we're going to plant all these trees and they're going to use all this water that could be in the stream where we are trying to make happen? So that was my what did Dan, you said a wild question that I tried to sneak in, but thank you. It sounds like it's being considered.
It's being considered, and what you're talking about is a water budget. But keep in mind, we know that we need riparian areas. And there has been areas that have been denuded of vegetation, and that has other impacts to the stream channel besides maybe increasing flows, right? And so I think there's these trade-offs, right? That as we start to treat impacted areas and the values that we're trying to restore, that there are trade-offs.
Yeah, that's why this is so fun.
Yep. It's complex. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up, and we can chat more about that. And I can, you know, let Rose know that you asked about that, and then she'll be presented at the Water and Climate Committee. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity for further discussion on that topic, but her study may not explore that.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, going on down, looking at our time, going on down to number 4, Eric Hartstein is going to take an update on administrative rule amendments, please.
Great. Thanks, Barbara. I'm having some internet connectivity issues, so I just joined by phone. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll be brief so we can get to the next agenda item. By way of background, the board authorized rulemaking at the January board meeting to the Division 5 OWEB grant program administrative rules. And these are the administrative rules that form really the umbrella over all the other agency specific grant type rules and provide the process for soliciting and administering the OWEB grant programs. So over the last winter and spring, staff worked on draft language in order to update and streamline the rules, as well as recruit a rulemaking advisory committee or a RAC to help with the process. And the RAC met twice over the summer, with both the meetings live streamed and recorded. We'll say the RAC really provided staff great feedback on how the proposed rules would impact them as applicants, grantees, and technical review team members. And we were able to fine-tune the draft language into what has been put now forward for public comment, and it was provided to you, the filing, and it's up on our website as well. And that will run through the month of December. And much of the proposed changes to the rules are really around kind of that updating and streamlining the language. But we do feel that one big, really substantive change is around eliminating the blanket 25% match requirement for all of OWEB grants and making it so that the required match will not exceed 25%, which will then allow for OWEB to reduce the match requirements for grant types that can be difficult for some to secure that 25% match. So we're thinking specifically around stakeholder engagement and technical assistance. So we see this really as an equity issue, and that this is a good move for the agency. So after the public comment period has ended at the end of December, staff will review all the comments that were provided or submitted and develop a document that summarizes each comment, the staff response to the comment, and if that comment results in a change to the draft rules. And then we'll package everything all up, including the final draft rules, for the board for consideration at the January meeting. So that I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Looks like Chris has his hand up.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Eric. Just a point of clarification on the on your comment regarding match. So I know this isn't the way you phrased it, but I guess what I was hearing was the change is to no longer make a 25% match a requirement, but that it's essentially voluntary with this rule change, proposed rule change.
So, yeah, thanks, Chris. The proposed rule change would still require there to be match. However, it will not be the current 25% match requirement, but rather a not to exceed 25% rate. And that will provide some flexibility with each grant offering. At the time of announcement, I would say, for example, restoration grants will still have a 25% match requirement, but as stakeholder engagement, we might reduce that down to $1 match requirement.
All right, that helps a lot. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, are there any other questions? All right, Dan, the next one's yours.
All right, well, the next one is a big one, and I know we're shooting for 10:15 for public comments, which are probably related to this one. So why don't I just turn it over to Eric? I think what's the name on this, right?
Yes, thanks, Dan. Eric Williams for the record. This item was placed on the agenda in terms of some internal staff discussions that we had following our last grants committee meeting, where you'll recall we talked about the many changes that we're making to the FIP application process in response to a lot of the feedback that we received from applicants, from public comments at board meetings, from follow-up conversations with FIP partnerships. And so I think we ended up in a good place in terms of process after the last meeting. And as we just talked about, we were talking about releasing the next solicitation in January. As we've started up our work with the cohort 3 FIPs, those that were awarded in January, it was a different cohort in terms of the land acquisition component of those FIPs. 4 of those 5 include land acquisitions, where in the past, we really haven't had that much activity in the FIP program. I think the one exception being the Deschutes FIP. And as staff were talking about some of the things that we were seeing in the cohort 3 FIPs and thinking about looking ahead to the cohort 4 solicitation, we were thinking about ways to better position both the partnerships and the staff for processing the requests that come in for land acquisition. And just as a couple of examples, we've seen in the applications that the board awarded in July, a whole host of land acquisition projects where the work plans that the board saw just really included kind of a placeholder for what could potentially be a project. Some of those projects are, somewhat developed. Some of them are just ideas at this point in time. And so there's this question that arose of how should we approach this in the FIP, where you've got kind of a spectrum of options, from you need to have a fully developed project to be included in a FIP application, all the way to, on the other end of the spectrum, treat it as kind of an open account that you can plug any project into. And we're seeing that tension between a more strategic approach to land acquisition and an opportunistic one, where if something comes up, we'll go for it, even if it was not really scoped as part of the FIP application that the board approved. And then, another factor in all of this is that these, of course, are perpetual actions. The resulting grants are projects that have easements on them in perpetuity. And the board is making their FIP funding decisions without having the ability to see what you would normally see under open solicitation in a land acquisition application, and delegating that authority to the director. And so as we started going down the road talking about this, and in conversations with FIP staff, with the executive team, with Lisa at OWEB, we realized that this conversation probably is better had more in a public format. And so that's why we requested the agenda item to be placed on the grants committee meeting, so that we can talk about this publicly rather than doing this administratively. And as you saw from the public comments that we received, they all were saying, we do not want to exclude land acquisition from eligibility in the FIP program. So we hear that loud and clear, and realize that that's not really a practical way forward. And so I think the item to discuss here, well, there's actually a couple of items to discuss here, are what parameters, if any, what thresholds, if any, do we want to include going forward in the cohort 4 solicitation regarding land acquisitions in FIPS. And then kind of as part of that, given that here we are in December and we are planning to go out to solicit in January, perhaps we want to hold off on releasing that solicitation at least for a couple of months, so that we can get a little bit more clarity on how we want to approach land acquisitions in FIPS. And so part of that, part of the thinking there is, okay, well then if we were to include some requirements, what would we be talking about? Do we want to have projects developed fully enough so that there's at least been conversations with landowners and landowner agreements or purchase options to be included in a work plan for a FIP? Now, recognizing that the FIP, of course, is intended to apply over a 6-year period, and it's not realistic to have that level of project development for 6 years. We do, however, have a work plan submitted for the first biennium, and then we have work plans that come in successive bienniums that the board approves when you approve future biennium funding for each FIP. And so that would be an opportunity to clear thresholds as each new biennium starts. And so we also have, as you saw in the introductions here today, members of the FIP staff, Jillian, Denise, Eric Hartstein are all here on board, and I would welcome them to make additional intro comments, and Lisa as well, before we get into conversation and then the public comment period. So let me see first if Lisa wants to add anything to that conversation.
Thanks, Eric. I think you did a nice job kind of summarizing our thoughts on wanting to make sure we have a public conversation around this. I think the impetus of our challenge right now is staff capacity. And we've talked about it with the board. We've taken on a lot of new things over the last year, and we just, awarded in July 5 new FIPs, and we're starting to get them started and then trying to get another set right on the cusp of that. I think we're all feeling the pressure of it's a little much. And there are still, I think, a few more policy discussions that we all on the board need to have that continue to come up around FIPs. And so I really appreciate kind of taking the time and would appreciate a little more time for us to make sure we fully vet this when this next round goes out, to do it in a really stepwise approach, and so that we can make sure we're adequately staffed for the volume of work that may come at us.
Thanks, Lisa. And I see 2 hands up, but I want to just give Denise, Jillian, Eric, is there anything else you'd like to add to the intro before we get into the board questions?
I might just raise one other comment that has come up with staff, which is that around these sort of opportunistic acquisitions that come up. So if FIP has land acquisition within their FIP as an eligible action, then it needs to come through the FIP. And so the partnership then somewhat becomes the gatekeeper. They have their work plans established and they have their budget set when the initiative is awarded. So when another project comes in that hasn't been included in their original work plan, they need to determine, do they want to fund that through the FIP and pull that money from some other project they had intended, or do they want to say no? And so that takes some of the decision away from the board and really does put it in the hands of the partnership, which could be considered. I mean, we're talking a lot about DEI. That could be considered, if an organization is not part of an existing partnership, if those projects haven't been vetted through, there is an element there where they may not have an opportunity then to pursue that acquisition through other OWEB grant programs that would have to go through the FIP. So it's just another consideration in the conversation.
Thanks, Jillian. And let's go to Mark and then Lindsay.
Okay, thank you. I want to apologize right up front because I have to leave at 10:15 for another appointment. So but I want to tell the folks who are going to be doing public comment, I did read all the letters and I don't read anything into what I'm about to say about not supporting acquisition program through the FIP. Strong supporter, really promote that. So don't read anything into it. I'm kind of on the same boat as Lisa. There's a couple different things. First of all, we've got a new administration coming in January. We have submitted our budget requests, and of course, we hope that that'll move through, but we don't know. So there's a little bit of a worry there that hopefully the new administration will support our budget request. And then I've had this comment before, so I'll say it again. No good deed goes unpunished. Because OWEB does such a good job, the legislature gives us more money. They give us different programs. They say, oh, you guys do a great job, so we're going to give you all this. And I've expressed this concern before. You have to make sure that when you give us the money that we do have the appropriate staff to support that. And so I'm worried significantly about if we get all this extra money and all these programs that we have the staff to be able to effectively administer this, so we can have that continued great thought process and representation that OWEB does have. And so I'm a little bit worried about that. And I was talking to Lisa about, where we are with the funding from the lottery and other sources and those kind of things. And so that's a little bit up in the air. It's pretty good right now. So hopefully it's still continuing there. But so all those are just a little bit of worries for me. And so pausing the program, not stopping it by any means, but pausing the program so that we can have some really significant board and staff discussions about where we're going to go with these programs, I think is warranted. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay, yeah, thank you. For the record, Lindsay McCleary. Just wanted to point out that I do believe that land acquisition is critical to the conservation work that OWEB as well as others do. We saw that outcry with the practitioners that submitted comments. So I would really like to see it in the FIP application, recognizing that we have a lot of work to do in a little bit of time, including today. I would really like to recommend moving that next FIP open solicitation to April and allow us some time over the next grant committee meetings to kind of workshop that. And I would like to see a good chunk of the time of those committee meetings devoted to some of those parameters that we talked about. So maybe looking at something about like maybe half of the time. I know there's a lot to get done, but would recommend at least a third to half of the time of the agenda to workshop this.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. Go ahead, Barbara.
So I heard you mention pause for a couple of months, Eric, but is a couple of months enough?
I think it is, because we, like we talked about last time, we pretty much have the application and that process dialed in. So it's really this one component. And the question then becomes, what, if any, parameters do we want to put around that in terms of the content of the applications, what details required to include something in the work plan. And so I think what we would do to try to line this up for possibly releasing the solicitation in April is maybe have an extra grant committee meeting in between now and the next regularly scheduled one, because the next one wouldn't be scheduled till March. And so perhaps we do a meeting in early February and dedicate that to this one topic. And between now and then, we can come up with some options and alternatives similar to what we did for the application process at the last grants committee meeting.
Okay, and just to continue with some of my comments, I support hitting pause. And I have several reasons. I always think of staff when we take on new things, and I just appreciate Lisa watching out for staff on this. We don't want to be known for rushing things forward, and if we're not comfortable moving something forward because it's unclear what it looks like in the future. I think Corey said it best at one of our meetings. We're experiencing growing pains, and it's okay. It's okay to hit pause so we can kind of sit back and really marinate with what it looks like. And it gives us a chance to listen more. And that's what I really, that's one of my main reasons for really supporting a pause on this.
Thanks, Barbara. Let's go to Dan.
Yeah, I ditto to everything Barbara and everybody else said. I mean, just pausing seems to be the right decision rather than making decisions about excluding aspects of a program that are extremely important. And I also just want to thank you for the decision to put it on the agenda and have this discussion. And I thank our people out there who are paying attention, those that we're about to hear from live, and also all of those that jumped on this in a very short time, provided very meaningful information. And I think that just shows there's a lot of passion out there for this, that we really want to make sure we take the time to figure out how to do it right. And from those comment letters, I'm guessing there's some folks that have some really good ideas about how to help OWEB and the board kind of think through these things. So definitely, I think a pause and take a time to get it right is the best thing to do.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead, Lisa.
There we go. My comment is somewhat similar to Dan's. I just want those people who have provided us a written comment and that we're going to hear from orally a big thank you, and to let them know we're listening. Because part of the reason for making sure and putting this on the agenda, and yes, it came on the agenda late because it came up in conversation late last week. I'm really committed to us having open dialogue and conversation around these issues, so that we can work through them in the best way possible, not just for the agency, but for our applicants and our partners, and be able to have the assistance that they need as well. And so, giving us a little more time to think through and workshop some of the issues that came up after our July board meeting, it is really appreciated. And I feel a real need to re-engage, with those applicants to make sure we're tracking it and listening to some of the challenges, as well as sharing ours.
Right. Thanks, Lisa. And so I think what we'll do is plan on scheduling a work session of this committee for likely sometime early February, but we'll be in touch around dates. And we do have 3 commenters in the waiting room. We have Vanessa Green from Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, Genevieve Perdue from Blue Mountain Land Trust, and Dan Royks from Columbia Land Trust. And if the co-chairs are ready for that, we can turn to public comment. Okay. Ivy, would you let the first commenter in the room, please? Welcome, Vanessa.
Vanessa, you're on mute.
Thank you. Am I your first commenter?
Yes.
You are.
I apologize. I had you streaming on YouTube and had to switch over to the live Zoom meeting. I lost a second of audio there. Well, good morning, OWEB Grants Committee and co-chairs Boyer and McAllister. As you know, my name is Vanessa Green. I serve as the executive director of the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, known as NOWC. I would like to offer a comment today regarding the potential removal of land acquisitions from eligibility in the FIP program. I was really interested in the discussion you had just now, and we're tracking with great interest, and we'll be paying attention to how it moves forward with your work session and then in conversation with the full OWEB board. And we know this is a new development, and we understand that more detailed information will be forthcoming. And NOWC is happy to coordinate conversations with Watershed Council representatives as the need and opportunity arises. We do want to note that watershed councils have had significant success conducting restoration work on easements and with other land acquisitions. Land acquisitions have been an important foundation for building collaborations with land trusts and others, where we have learned to complement each other's work and we have become valuable partners for one another. Some of the past and present FIP partnerships that have achieved hallmark restoration outcomes prioritized land acquisitions as restoration strategies. As one example, the John Day Basin Partnership acquired a high priority property in the headwaters of the Middle Fork John Day. This acquisition opened 1.58 miles of spawning and rearing habitat for mid-Columbia steelhead, mid-Columbia chinook, and bull trout for future planned restoration on the property, and it enabled additional restoration on adjacent Forest Service land. Without land acquisition grant funding available through the FIP, this acquisition would not have occurred, and subsequent critical restoration projects on this property would not happen. In general, a change to this dynamic could have significant impacts on the inter-organizational dynamics in our seasoned collaborations, and it could affect our abilities to meet ecological goals. So we are interested to hear more about how OWEB plans to address this change, if approved, to continue to fund this highly effective conservation strategy through other programs or methods. And we support the grant committee's notion to take the time to consider this potential change cautiously and encourage you to engage with your conservation partners as you proceed. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Vanessa. All right, so we have Genevieve next. Is she on? There you are. All right, Genevieve, you've got 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Genevieve. I'm with Blue Mountain Land Trust. And I'd like to say that land acquisition is a critical part of the habitat protection work that land trusts do across Oregon through Measure 76. The Focused Investment Partnership Acquisition Program specifically empowers land trusts to play a significant role in the long-term protection of restoration efforts and critical fish and wildlife habitat. Blue Mountain Land Trust is a member of the John Day Basin Partnership, a group of 30 county, state, federal, tribal, and nonprofit entities that have worked together over thousands of hours and several years to identify the top priority areas for conservation and restoration in the John Day Basin. This partnership was funded by the FIP. In addition to identifying priority areas, this partnership identified land acquisition as the top restoration action. Through this prioritization work, BMLT acquired a top-ranking 278-acre property on the headwaters of the Middle Fork of the John Day Basin, including 1.58 miles of spawning and rearing habitat for Mid-Columbia steelhead, Mid-Columbia chinook, and bull trout that will undergo significant habitat restoration efforts in the coming years. BMLT staff have invested hundreds of hours supporting and helping build this partnership to be able to pursue opportunities such as this. Without land acquisition dollars through the FIP, this critical opportunity and others like it would be missed, and land trusts would be left behind in the partnership building opportunities. Removing this offering would also severely limit local natural resource and conservation entities within a FIP from making strategic conservation decisions for the area they serve. With demand and urgency for land and habitat conservation only increasing, cutting this valuable acquisition tool seems inappropriate. On behalf of BMLT, I urge OWEB to support the FIP acquisition tool and bolster staff capacity as necessary to help it succeed rather than eliminate it when it is most needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. All right, moving on down to Dan. Are you on the phone, or there you are? All right, Dan, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry about that. It's the switching over from YouTube to Zoom is a little confusing, but sorry if I'm not sure if my camera, oh, let me see if I can get my camera.
We see
Okay,
you.
Great, thank you. So I'm Dan Royks, Conservation Director with Columbia Land Trust. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. Sorry that I'm on my phone. The reason I am is that the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts is currently having our annual membership meeting, which was scheduled for all day today. But for that, I think you would probably have about 17 or 18 people representing different organizations from the land trust community on here commenting with similar comments to what you've just heard and similar comment letters that were submitted by Columbia Land Trust. It sounds like, from what I was able to hear in the conversation, that the concept of just pulling acquisitions out of the Focus Investment Program is off the table for now, and myself and Columbia Land Trust are thankful for that. What I guess I want to share today, in addition to the written comments we submitted, is that this really sounds like an issue around capacity and capacity to complete land acquisitions that have been identified through the Focus Investment Programs as the highest priority. The Focus Investment Programs are working. They're hundreds of thousands of dollars, thousands of hours from dozens and probably hundreds at this point of organizations have gone into these strategic plans at OWEB's direction, with OWEB support, to define what is the most important conservation actions we can take. And when acquisitions become that most important conservation acquisition, it's imperative that OWEB continues to support that. So if there are capacity issues, and it sounds like there clearly are, and that would be consistent with things that have come up in the past, if there are capacity issues to complete those land acquisitions, then that should be the focus of conversation. The focus should be, how can OWEB have increased capacity and or make changes to its land acquisition process in order to support and complete more land acquisition in Oregon? That needs to be the focus. The focus should not be how to put new rules in place in order to reduce the number of acquisitions that come forward to match existing capacity. And I'm concerned that the conversation over the next few months will be more about, how do we limit the amount of acquisitions coming in so that there's enough capacity, so that the existing capacity is adequate, as opposed to what changes need to happen in order to do more land conservation work in the state of Oregon. The state of Oregon is I worry is falling behind at a time when we need to be moving faster. The climate change impacts are greater and greater every year. There is more and more federal funding available, but only if we can step up and do enough work in our state to bring that money in. So I urge all of you on the board and on the staff to really focus on how do we get more done, not how do we change the rules so that we can stay within our existing capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. All right, well, I have to sign off, so I'm passing the baton to my co-chair, Dan. I have to leave at 10:30. So I will listen to the end of this meeting when it goes up on YouTube so I can hear what happened. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Barbara. And I think actually that wraps up our agenda. I want to open it up to board members for any last comments, and it looks like Liza Jane has one. Liza Jane, you're on mute. Uh-oh.
Technology is
Well,
not
there
my
you go.
friend. Oh, whew, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to hear it all before I made a comment. So a favorite saying I have is no does not mean never. It just means not right now. And, hearing Eric, you said in the last FIP, there was 4 out of 5 included land acquisitions, and what a huge change that was for us. And I think that it's so important if OWEB continues to do such an incredible job. It's partially because if you try and do everything and so much, you don't do anything well at all. And so we need to take the time, go slow to go fast. This is great. We know it's great, but it's a big change. And I really want the opportunity to continue hearing from people and having input on the FIP. There was other issues around the FIP that gave us this chance to really look at it. And that's what we want to do. And there might be other areas where we can improve and do better. It's not forever, but it's really important that we take care of staff, that they feel good about the work that they can do and that they're doing it well and that they're being able to serve our grantees. So it's not forever, it's just right now. And I really appreciate, Lisa, you having the courage to put this out there, knowing it's a conflict, it can create a conflict. We can manage that conflict and we'll come out better. So thank you everyone for the public comments, for the commitment and the work. It's inspiring. So no worries.
What a perfect way to wrap up the meeting, Liza. Thank you. Chris, I don't know if you had anything else as the last remaining committee member besides myself here from the board.
I do not, Dan. Thanks.
Okay. And as far as requesting agenda items, I think we've got a full agenda moving ahead. So I don't think we need to add anything more. So I think I'll hand it over to Eric, I guess, to end the meeting.
Yeah, I think Lisa has a comment. Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see anything, Lisa.
I didn't put my hand up,
Gotcha.
virtually. I was like doing the twitching. I think I want to say something instead. So thank you, board members and everyone who reached out with the public comment. This did what I hoped it would do to understand, the real need and interest and necessity. I appreciate that open dialogue. I also think there are still a couple more policy issues related to FIP that this committee should probably grapple with that came up in July. And they're board policy discussions. And so we'll work on getting those on the next coming board agenda meeting. Some of it is, one of the things that came up is, what do you do with FIPs that were funded once and they come back in for a second time? I think we just need to have conversation about a couple of those things to help our applicants have a little more direction. What I have heard is FIPS do a lot of different things for the partnerships. They provide opportunity for match, for other grant opportunities that are out there. And I really want us to make sure we are clear on our path, and help the applicants find the best possible pass through OWEB to the places they need to do the good work on the ground. And, you know, some of the slowing this down is probably, you know, learning about the programs and finding additional opportunities that people haven't tapped into yet. So just a big thank you. Keep the conversations open, and to those people who have provided comment, please don't hesitate to reach out, even here in the agency, and to me personally, to have conversations. I appreciate it, and I learn a lot from it, and it really helps spur these additional conversations with our board to grapple with some of the tough issues.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think that is, anyone else? Remind me how to officially close out the meeting, Eric.
I think you can just say the meeting is adjourned.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody on the phone, everybody watching from YouTube, and all the people who spoke with verbal comments and wrote in comments. We'll see you all again next time.
Thank you.
Take care.